Part 1. It's the 11,396th day of the war, a day that began with whispers of diplomacy but unfolded into a complex web of intrigue, tension, and uneasy alliances. Ukrainian, European, and American delegations met once again, this time under the quiet sun of Miami. No grand announcements followed, only brief, carefully chosen words. Further cooperation, next steps, continued dialogue. The message was clear. Something significant was taking shape, but not for the public eye. What was discussed behind closed doors remained hidden, and that silence was louder than any statement. Observers noticed one particularly striking detail. The Europeans were at the table again. That alone speaks volumes. After months of debates and hesitations, Europe has not only resumed its role in shaping Ukraine's defense, but has also effectively financed it for years ahead. The meeting marked a shift, one where Washington, Brussels, and Kiev are recalibrating their coordination amid new global uncertainties. But while diplomats exchanged promises, other fronts, political and literal, were heating up. Back in Moscow, Vladimir Putin delivered yet another of his long annual performances, an exercise of controlled rhetoric designed to sound like governance, but often revealing more than intended. He spoke of millions of Ukrainians allegedly residing in Russia, 5 to 10 million, he said, who must have the right to vote. Analysts called this a manipulation, an attempt to blur citizenship lines and justify interference in future Ukrainian elections. But the numbers don't hold. According to Russia's own 2021 census, fewer than 900,000 Ukrainians lived there, far from Putin's fantasy figures. Even factoring in those displaced or deported since 2022, the truth is starkly smaller. Still, the real message wasn't statistical. It was political. By floating the idea of allowing supposed Ukrainian citizens in Russia to vote, the Kremlin is laying groundwork, either for contesting Ukraine's upcoming elections or for undermining them altogether. "We could stop long-range strikes for one day," Putin added casually, suggesting a temporary pause during the vote. But experts immediately noted the absurdity. Voting amid war zones, without full ceasefire, is legally impossible. The proposal was a provocation, one that would inevitably force Kyiv and its allies to respond. How they do could shape the coming months of both diplomacy and conflict. Meanwhile, far from those press halls, Europe itself found reason for unease. A disturbing incident shook the French port of Sète last Friday. Authorities boarded the passenger ferry Fantastic, a vessel regularly operating between France, Italy, and North Africa, after receiving an alert from Italian intelligence. What they found on board was alarming. A compact, high-tech device capable of remote interference with the ship's navigation and communication systems. In simpler terms, a cyber control node. Investigators fear it could have allowed someone, somewhere, to seize command of the ship. The implication was chilling. A potential attempt to hijack a civilian vessel without ever setting foot on it. 2 crew members were detained. One, a young Latvian trainee, the other, a Bulgarian sailor, later released. The French Interior Minister, Laurent Nunez, confirmed the investigation's focus. "We are examining a case of foreign interference. Similar operations, we know, have originated from the same source before." He didn't name the country. He didn't need to. In Paris, officials and journalists alike understood the subtext. All signs pointed toward Moscow. If confirmed, this would mark the first known attempt to weaponize a passenger ferry through cyber means on European soil. A bold, dangerous move, and a warning that the hybrid war between Russia and Europe is evolving into new, unpredictable domains. The Fantastic case isn't just about espionage. It's about the vulnerability of Europe's infrastructure and the growing realization that any system, civilian or military, may already be under silent observation. And yet, even as these revelations emerged, the world's attention turned to other theaters. In Eastern Europe, Diplomatic tensions flared between Ukraine and Poland, longtime allies now divided by historical memory and refugee policies. But amid that friction, a glimmer of optimism appeared. Poland's new president, Karol Nawrocki, met Volodymyr Zelensky in Warsaw for the first time since taking office. Their talks, though cautious, ended with an agreement on exhumation permits for World War II victims, a small but symbolic step toward reconciliation. Beyond that, the Polish leader hinted at something bigger, the possible transfer of MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine, a decision that, if realized, could once again tilt the air war's balance. Elsewhere, another continent quietly stepped forward. Australia confirmed it had completed the delivery of M1A1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, a shipment long delayed, now finally fulfilled. 5 Australian officers spent nearly 2 months accompanying the armored convoy by sea, ensuring the tank's safe arrival in Europe. For Ukraine, every addition to its armored fleet matters. These Abrams, though few in number, represent more than steel and firepower. They symbolize persistence, proof that allies far beyond Europe still see Ukraine's defense as their shared cause. And while nations delivered on promises, others reinforced them. In Prague, the new Czech defense minister, Jaromír Zuna, reaffirmed his country's commitment to continue the Czech Ammunition Initiative, a program to source and supply shells for Ukraine from third countries. Support for Ukraine, he said plainly, is a given. His remarks came even as populist politics gained ground across Central Europe. But for now, the Czech initiative stands, a rare, steady point of clarity amid Europe's wavering consensus. Everywhere across this vast landscape, from the corridors of Miami diplomacy to the docks of southern France, from the skies above Ukraine to the meeting rooms of Prague, threads are converging. Something larger is in motion. But to understand what's really taking shape, you'll need to hear what came next, where these pieces begin to connect, and what they reveal about the next phase of this long and complex war. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe, because what comes next changes the meaning of everything you've just heard. The truth began to emerge as night fell across Europe. The details of what was said in Miami slowly leaked through diplomatic channels, painting a clearer but far more complex picture. The negotiations, it turned out, were not about peace, at least not in the traditional sense. They focused on a new framework of long-term military coordination, an updated security architecture that would bind Ukraine even closer to the Western Bloc, with Europe assuming greater financial responsibility, while the United States concentrated on strategic deterrence. The plan, according to insiders, involves joint production of air defense systems, a gradual transfer of command structures under a unified NATO supervision model, and, crucially, the inclusion of a new strategic stability dialogue involving both Washington and Kyiv. This was a diplomatic reconfiguration disguised as routine consultation, and its implications for Russia could be enormous. Sources close to the talks say that the American side, led by representatives of the State Department and the National Security Council, pushed for accelerated integration of Ukrainian logistics into NATO systems. European delegates, led by defense envoys from Germany, France, and Poland, reportedly supported the proposal but insisted that the financial burden be shared proportionally. Ukrainian negotiators, including NSDC Secretary Rustem Umerov, focused on the immediate need for guaranteed air defense coverage and replacement of depleted ammunition stocks. In essence, Miami became the birthplace of a new military alliance within an alliance, one that officially does not yet exist on paper but already functions in practice. And just as this political puzzle was forming, a series of parallel events began to unfold across Europe and beyond, each seemingly unrelated, yet connected through timing and intent. The discovery of the cyber device aboard the Fantastic ferry in France was not an isolated incident. Days later, cybersecurity analysts in Italy and Spain reported similar patterns of network probing targeting maritime systems. Investigators suspect coordinated testing, a rehearsal for future interference. If these findings are confirmed, Europe might be facing the first stage of a campaign to compromise its civilian fleet infrastructure. The enemy's target is not just ships, but confidence itself. A shaken public, a nervous government, an economy questioning its security, all of that is part of the plan. While Europe faces silent incursions, Ukraine continues to strike visibly and with increasing precision. In the Mediterranean, Ukrainian heavy drones carried out one of the most daring operations in recent months. Acting on intelligence provided by the Security Service of Ukraine, long-range unmanned aircraft targeted a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker used to evade international sanctions. The attack occurred more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukrainian territory, a statement that no distance is safe for those fueling Russia's war. Satellite data later confirmed that the damaged tanker, identified as Kendall, changed course and attempted to reach the Egyptian coast for emergency repairs. The strike demonstrated both the growing reach of Ukrainian capabilities and the collapse of Russia's maritime sense of immunity. At the same time, in the Black Sea, Ukrainian naval drones hit another Russian vessel, likely the patrol ship Rasul Gamzatov, part of the 22460 project, one of the few ships equipped with guided missile systems. The footage released by Ukraine's Special Operations Forces showed a direct impact, followed by secondary explosions. Analysts from open-source intelligence groups concluded that the strike likely rendered the ship inoperable. Each such hit reduces Russia's naval projection and strengthens Ukraine's leverage in upcoming negotiations. The geography of Ukrainian attacks continues to expand, from the Caspian platforms to the Mediterranean, from the Black Sea to the depths of Russian territory. But while the military front expands, the humanitarian cost rises. In Odessa, Russian strikes on port infrastructure killed 8 people and wounded at least 27. One of the missiles hit a bus carrying workers. Another shattered windows in residential buildings, leaving entire neighborhoods without power and water. According to Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Kuleba, around 75,000 households in the region were left in the dark after the assault. This is no longer a tactic of military pressure. It is deliberate infrastructural terror aimed at breaking civilian resilience. Bridges in Mykolaiv and Odessa regions were also hit, with drones and ballistic missiles targeting key crossings over the Dniester. Analysts believe these attacks aim to isolate southwestern Ukraine from its logistics network and block the flow of fuel imports through Danube ports. The consequences could be severe. Transport experts warn that if the Dniester bridges remain closed, up to 60% of Ukraine's fuel imports could be disrupted. Prices at gas stations might rise within days. Long lines of vehicles have already formed near alternative routes through Moldova and Venetia. Local residents report smugglers charging up to 10,000 hryvnias for unauthorized crossings by boat. Such scenes evoke the early months of the full-scale invasion: panic, scarcity, and improvisation. But the government insists the situation is under control. Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko stated that no significant fuel shortages are expected and that logistics are being recalibrated through Romania and Poland. Yet the mood remains tense, as every strike on infrastructure ripples through the nation's fragile economy. On the military front, the situation around Pokrovsk remains among the most difficult. Russian forces, though suffering heavy losses, continue to crawl through the city's northern districts. The Deep State Monitoring Project recorded new Russian attempts to regain lost positions near Dobropilya, possibly to create pressure toward Kostiantynivka and Druzhkivka. Analysts note that the pattern of Russian assaults, small groups advancing house by house, resembles urban warfare tactics used in Mariupol and Bakhmut. Meanwhile, Ukrainian defenders deploy drones to maintain control over kill zones, trying to trap infiltrating units. Reports from the front lines describe intense close-quarters battles, where drones, artillery, and infantry blend into a single mechanism of attrition. The scale of destruction in Pokrovsk grows daily. What used to be neighborhoods are now just coordinates on military maps. Further north, near Vovchansk and Kupiansk, Russian troops are also stuck. Ukrainian positions on both banks of the Oskil River remain firm. Analysts like Kostyantin Mashovets describe the situation as static but costly. Russia can neither advance nor regroup effectively, as its 6th Combined Arms Army is overstretched across multiple directions. Ukrainian counterattacks continue to disrupt Russian logistics, forcing their units to divert resources from the front to protect supply routes. The word coming from Ukrainian officers is clear: Kupiansk will hold. Yet not all fronts are purely military. Inside Ukraine, concern is growing about sabotage and disinformation. The situation in Huliaipole is particularly worrying. Reports surfaced of possible sabotage within the 102nd Territorial Defense Brigade. Anonymous sources claim some officers encouraged unauthorized withdrawals, spreading panic and confusion. The Deep State Project warned that a combination of poor coordination, misinformation, and external manipulation could lead to a loss of the city. Ukrainian command responded by deploying elite reinforcements, including the 225th and 33rd Assault Regiments. Whether these measures will stabilize the defense remains to be seen, but the psychological pressure is mounting. As the report states, the enemy is trying not only to attack with weapons, but to corrode trust from within. At the same time, behind the front lines, the war takes on new forms. The Ukrainian Foundation Come Back Alive completed modernization of 16 ZSU-23-4 Shilka self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. With new digital fire control systems, radar units, and navigation suites, these once obsolete Soviet machines have been reborn as modern anti-drone platforms. Capable of tracking 20 targets simultaneously, the upgraded Shilkas now protect critical infrastructure and military installations. This is a symbol of adaptation, proof that innovation, not quantity, keeps Ukraine's defenses alive. Meanwhile, Russia continues to burn from within. Explosions rocked Bryansk and Oryol regions, reportedly hitting ammunition depots and power substations. In Belgorod, authorities imposed energy rationing after another drone strike. Even far beyond the front, the war's fire reaches deep into Russian territory, a constant reminder that no city is beyond the reach of retaliation. But the statistics of destruction are only one side of the story. Behind every number lies the human toll, the silent burden of those left behind. In one of the most tragic updates, Ukrainian and Russian officials exchanged the bodies of over 1,000 fallen soldiers. It's a grim routine. Trucks moving through the front lines carrying the remains of those who once stood there alive. Russia, through its envoy Vladimir Medinsky, confirmed the return of 26 Russian soldiers' bodies, while Ukraine acknowledged receiving far more. Independent analysts from Lost Armor estimate that Russia has repatriated 16,000 bodies this year, far fewer than the figures of 500,000 casualties claimed by Russian Defense Minister Belousov. The math simply doesn't add up. Even pro-Russian channels now admit the losses are far higher than officials confess. The war is consuming entire generations, and the Kremlin's narrative grows thinner with each passing month. As night covers the battlefield, stories from the front continue to emerge. Stories of courage, exhaustion, betrayal, and survival. The line between heroism and tragedy blurs, and beyond that line, a new struggle begins, not only for territory, but for truth itself. Because what follows next is not about borders or weapons, it's about what this war is doing to the societies that fight it, and to those who pretend they don't. Part 3. The deeper layer of this story lies not on the battlefield but in the lives that surround it. In the quiet desperation and moral corrosion spreading through a country that has built its identity on war. Inside Russia, what was once patriotic enthusiasm has curdled into something darker: fear, resentment, and the slow unraveling of a militarized society. The news from within tells the story better than any speech from the Kremlin. In December, an appeal appeared online from Alexander Kameny, a Russian contract soldier stationed in Primorsky Krai. In his trembling voice, he begged President Vladimir Putin to release him from service so he could care for his blind and disabled wife and their two small children, one of them severely ill. His requests had been rejected again and again. Regional authorities offered no help, telling him that if he could not manage his family, he could leave the children in a state institution. His words, "Don't let them destroy my family," spread through social networks before being swiftly censored. This single story reflects a broader truth. Even those who once fought for the regime now find themselves trapped by it. In another case, a Belarusian citizen named Denis Linkovich, forcibly conscripted into the Russian army, vanished in September after months of extortion within his unit. His mother Tatiana described to journalists how her son and fellow soldiers were forced to pay 40,000 rubles each month for regimental needs. Drinking water was rationed to 300 grams per day, food was scarce, and communication with families allowed only after bribes to commanding officers. Her son disappeared after reporting abuses. Such testimonies are increasingly common, an echo of the systemic decay that eats through Russia's army from the inside. Soldiers are not merely victims or aggressors. They are both, consumed by a machine that no longer knows why it fights. The human fallout extends far beyond the trenches. Across Russian towns, returning veterans, broken by war, unfit for civilian life, become headlines for the worst reasons. In the city of Kursk, a 44-year-old platoon commander, Denis Shokin, was arrested for assaulting and sexually abusing an 11-year-old girl. In Siberia, in the small town of Svirsk, a 24-year-old war participant, Kirill Putintsev, murdered his girlfriend after a domestic argument, leaving 2 children orphaned. Local media revealed he had previously served in Ukraine, been captured, and released in a prisoner exchange. Now back home, he carried war within him, violence that no longer needed a battlefield. The pattern repeats across regions: veterans drunk, armed, uncontrolled, committing crimes while authorities remain silent. These are the human remnants of the so-called special military operation. Russia glorifies them as heroes, but in reality, they are ghosts of a war that is devouring its own nation from within. The rot reaches the top. In early December, Russian ultranationalist networks erupted after the sudden death of Stanislav Orlov, better known by his nom de guerre, Spaniard. Once the commander of the volunteer brigade Española, a formation of football hooligans and neo-Nazi militants fighting in Ukraine, Orlov was reportedly killed during his arrest in Moscow. State media hinted at a shootout linked to illegal arms trading. Others spoke of an internal cleansing. The pro-Kremlin blogger Alexei Zhivov, previously Orlov's close associate, denied being detained and resumed posting propaganda as if nothing had happened. To many observers, the case marked a turning point. The regime beginning to eliminate its own paramilitary radicals, the same ones it once funded and celebrated. Even the infamous DSHRG, Rusich, led by neo-Nazi Alexei Milchikov, publicly expressed fear that they might be next. This quiet purge reveals how fragile the regime's internal balance has become. The monsters it created are now liabilities, and they are being erased one by one. Outside Russia, the consequences of this decay are felt in the most unexpected places. Reports from India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka describe young men lured by Russian recruiters with promises of legal jobs and high salaries. Over 200 Indian citizens have been documented as fighting for Russia in Ukraine. The Indian government confirms 26 killed, 7 missing, and dozens still stranded on the front lines. Many were tricked into signing contracts written in Russian, which they could not read, only to find themselves deployed in assault units near Donetsk. Delhi has formally demanded repatriation of its citizens. The pattern is clear. Russia's recruitment machine has gone global, exploiting the poor and the desperate to fill its ranks. For Moscow, these men are expendable, foreign bodies in a war that feeds on them like fuel. Amid this chaos, Ukraine continues to transform necessity into innovation. The Come Back Alive Foundation's modernization of the Shilka systems became a symbol of technological resilience. Engineers replaced outdated radar stations with digital multifunctional sensors, integrated GPS navigation, and new data processors. The results astonished even Western observers. Target acquisition time reduced from 18 seconds to 2, detection range doubled, and the ability to track 20 targets simultaneously. These vehicles now guard strategic facilities across the country, a testament to what citizen-driven initiatives can achieve when survival itself becomes an act of engineering. Ukraine's defense today is no longer defined solely by Western aid, but by its ability to reinvent the tools it already possesses. At the same time, Ukrainian drone warfare continues to evolve with unprecedented speed. Investigative journalist Yuri Butusov, now serving on the front as a drone operator, wrote in his field report that the biggest threat to Ukrainian defense is not the lack of equipment, but the lack of organization. Many units have drones but fail to maintain constant surveillance, leaving gaps that allow Russian infantry to infiltrate. His analysis triggered Ref.